Three.
Welcome to the Patriarchy Club. My name is Don Juan Diaz de Leon and my guest Charles Coulombe. Welcome, Charles.
Hello, hello. Great to be here.
Thank you. First question. The 2020 elections around the corner. Donald Trump captured almost 30% of the Latino vote. Do you think he can capture that or even more in this coming elections?
Well, there are two imponderables. The first is the economy. If we don't have a recession, I think he's going to win regardless. That's the first thing. Second thing is, he might very well be able to capture more. See, a lot's going to depend upon what sideshow freak the Democrats put up. I don't say that to be unkind, but we look, I mean, whether you like the Trumpster or you don't, he's a known commodity. He is what he is. You know, he and Boris Johnson in England apparently have the same barber. But what the Democrats have shown us so far are, you know, the gay mayor, Bernie Sanders is alive again, Kamala Harris. I don't see anybody there that would appeal to the Latinos at all. I mean, all they can do is promise stuff, but they're, for most Latinos, I think, not that I'm a spokesman, but I think they're pretty repugnant as people. So, a lot will depend on who the Democrats nominate.
And what will it take for the Republican Party to make more gains into the Latino community? Because it seems you're Mexican, you're Latino, therefore you default to being a Democrat. How can that change?
Well, several ways. Firstly, one of the statistics I love to repeat to people is that in the 2008 election, which brought us Mr. Obama to the throne, in California, rather, we had Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage. Now, Imperial County is the most heavily Latino county in the state. It went most heavily for Obama, most heavily for Proposition 8. Now, nobody has bothered to look at this or explore this phenomenon, but there's a big disconnect between Latino values and Latino voting patterns. You would need a Republican candidate who is willing to say, what's this? You know, and to cite things like that, like the Imperial County vote. You vote for them, that's what you're getting. You vote for me, you're voting for your conscience. So you decide what you are. I don't say who.
No, Charles, I'm very intrigued by this phenomenon. You know, I'm Catholic, so when I go to a Spanish service, the priest doesn't tell or doesn't say who to vote for.
No.
But he will say or mention to vote for a candidate that's more pro-immigrant. Yet when I go to an English service, again, same thing, they don't tell us who to vote for, but then they say vote for the candidates that are more pro-life. So therefore, when we go to the polls, we cancel each other out.
Yeah.
Because if I'm in a Spanish service and they're saying vote for a candidate that's more pro-immigrant, pro-immigration, I'm thinking Democrat. When I go to an English service, they say, well, try to vote for a candidate that's more pro-life, I'm thinking Republican. So when we go out and vote, then don't we cancel the Catholics, cancel their votes out?
Well, they do, and there's another problem here. Actually, there are several. You know, I always like to say that I don't like commenting on the immigration question simply because everyone's lying. And I mean that. The so-called anti-immigration people won't deal with the real fear, which is that the anger will be outbred by the Chicano, by the Latino, by the Hispanic, because the native-born, black and white alike, don't breed. You know, they don't. Not sufficient numbers, you know. So you have this seeming vast sea of brown in the South that will overwhelm us with their fertility.
The second Reconquista.
Exactly. But of course, that prescinds from a lot of realities. The birth rate's going down the tubes there too.
Right.
The Latinos are becoming as corrupt as we are in terms of contraception. I mean, that's all.
Right.
Nobody keeps that in mind. And what no one will address is the fact that the initial need for more bodies, A, to pay taxes, B, to work, see to consume goods, it results of a lack of births on the part of the native born. Nobody's going to touch that. Nobody's going to say that.
Right.
What candidate would say to the American people, you need to start breeding, you need to get rid of the pill?
Right.
It would be like saying stop divorcing.
Exactly.
You know, if you don't stop divorcing, you'll have more broken homes, and we'll get even screwier than we are. Nobody's going to say that. Similarly, no one's going to say that Mexico's policies with regard to Central American immigrants are far worse than ours with regard to Mexican immigrants. You know, if I were president and I were tired of hearing the Mexican government yapping, I'd say, you know what, gang, you're right. From now on, your laws are our laws. We deal with immigrants as you deal with immigrants. When your laws change, our laws change. Right now, we adopt your laws.
Should we build a wall?
You know, I have no real opinion on that. I really don't, because it goes back to what I've been saying. Against what and for what? You know, I believe we should get control of our border. Why? Because that's part of sovereignty.
Right, exactly.
But having said that, the jumping up and down about the wall, as I say, keeps people from looking at the real issues. Another problem, for instance, with the massive immigration of the United States is the damage it's done to Mexico.
Right.
Nobody's going to talk about that. In my time, for instance, I've seen telenovelas go from being these sort of Victorian morality plays to porn.
Right. Or now we have the narco telenovelas.
Yes. And that is intimately connected with the partially immigration-connected decay of Mexican culture. Nobody's going to say that, though, are they?
Charles, yes, Mexican culture it's crumbling, and I have a theory, and I don't know if you would agree with this theory or not, but you know, Mexico comes across as this Aztec nation, you know, La Nación Azteca, right? I'm not Mexican, I'm Aztec, you know, I'm
no.
Indigenous, right? And I think that's part of the problem of Mexico. Why? Because the Aztec civilization was very savage.
It sure was.
Very barbaric. And this is what we see now in Mexico. So therefore, by saying we are Aztecs, now we're actually playing it out in Mexico today.
With a barbaric result.
Right.
And you've got Santa Muerte and all this stuff.
Right.
What gets lost is what a civilized country Mexico was.
Right, and people forget. So instead of saying we're Aztecs, we should say we are Hispanos.
Yeah.
Because with the Viceroyalty of New Spain, Mexico was a stable nation.
It sure was.
A prosperous nation, a civilized nation for 300 years.
And what's forgotten too, when you talk about the Indians of Mexico, is that under the Viceroyalty, they ran their own affairs.
Right,
And
the two naciones, the two nations, the Spanish and the Indian nation.
So, for instance, in Tlaxcala, the princes of Tlaxcala, who were princes in the Spanish nobility, the princes of Tlaxcala, I mean, if you look at the state maps of Mexico, you see Tlaxcala sitting there. Well, the reason why it's like that is because it was a semi-independent province under its own rulers.
Right.
And the College of the Royal, the Noble, what was it called? The Noble College. It was the College for Indian Nobility in Tlaxcala. Sent professors to teach in Spanish universities.
Right, and you know, some Mexicans, or the majority of Mexicans, even Chicanos, do not know this, that this idea to identify ourselves with our indigenous past is actually made up in the 1940s by the Mexican government after the Revolution War.
And then added to by Anglo academics in the United States.
Exactly, so it is a fictitious identity.
Yeah.
And by doing so, we negate 300 years of history.
And when you consider, for instance, how many self-identified Chicanos, Latinos, etc., have ever heard say of Lucas Salaman?
Right, and the only one they know is for Juan Inés de la Cruz.
Right, and she was a nun. But
according to, I talked about this with Dr. Lizzo, you know, she's now in academia, she's a feminist, a lesbian, a freedom fighter against patriarchy, pretty soon she's gonna be a Democrat.
And then after that, she'll be a priestess in the Aztec temple. But, chopping out the hearts herself and laughing while she did so.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is that Mexico produced, not just under the Viceroyalty, but the early Republic as well, it produced some really incredible people, none of whom have been heard of today.
Right.
And there is you might say, an alternative tradition in Mexican letters and in politics that no one's ever heard of.
Well, the majority of, I don't want to generalize, but most Mexicans only know Santa Muerte and Frida Kahlo.
Yes.
Beyond that, the knowledge of Mexican heroes or intellectuals is.
They might know someone like Juarez, but see, even Juarez, they don't really know. They don't know that Juarez was an American puppet.
Right.
They don't know that he was heavily armed and financed by the United States. First in the War of the Reform to defeat the conservatives, and then to fight Maximilian.
Right, because Maximiliano wanted to rebuild the Mexican Empire.
No.
Which represented a threat to the United States.
It sure did.
Plus, his royal blood connected him to the major European powers.
It did indeed, and that would have perhaps reignited their interest in this part of the world. What's funny about him, and there was the first Mexican emperor, Agustín de Iturbide, and he only took the throne because he couldn't find a European willing to take it. So he said, well, fine. But Iturbide was early on murdered, executed. But when Maximiliano and Carlota found that they couldn't have kids, they adopted Iturbide's grandson as their heir. And that family is still around today.
Would Mexico be better off today under monarchy?
Oh, I should say. I mean, that was probably the last chance for a truly independent government from the United States. You know the old saying, poor little Mexico is so far from God and so close to the United States.
Right. And now, talking about if Mexico will be better off with a monarchy, we have López Obrador.
Yep.
He demanded an apology from Spain. Should Spain apologize
No.
for its role in 1492 of westernizing Latin America?
No, López Obrador should apologize for being an idiot.
Well, I don't think he would. He's going
Why?
to.
A politician of his stature apologize for being what he is?
Well,
Never.
according to him, he came in and just, destroyed his great native civilization.
Let me tell you, the
impose
only reason they were able to do that was because of the assistance and alliance of all the Aztecs Indian allies who were tired of seeing their brightest and best murdered by Aztec priests. People forget that. Like the Tlaxcalans, of whom I spoke earlier. After a while, after a century or two of seeing your young men and women get their hearts cut out, a little bit of resentment.
Exactly.
A little bit of resentment, maybe. Now, I think López Obrador, like so many politicians today around the globe, is an idiot.
But
And I'm not saying that's bad.
no, but you have in the United States, you have professors in American universities that agree with López Obrador that Spain should apologize for the great Holocaust they committed in the Americas. Over 100 million natives died after 1492.
Anyone who truly feels this way should show his fidelity to his beliefs by abandoning European dress, European cuisine, European medicine, European language.
But
No, they're all beneficiaries.
according to
They are beneficiaries of that terrible time.
But
And to show their fidelity to the truth, they should get rid of it all.
But the thing, Charles, is according to them, they're discolonizing us.
And I know, I agree with them. They should decolonize themselves to start.
They discolonize because we have been oppressed
No.
by the West.
They're the ones who are oppressing, and they need to start by stripping themselves of everything Western. Show the rest of us the way. They need to lead by example.
Well, we know that they will not.
Oh, of course they will, because they're not worthless hypocrites. They are not scum. They will rise up. They'll rip off their clothing. They'll speak only in indigenous tongues, or if they don't know any, they'll shut up. They'll stop eating European food, and they'll only go to native shamans for medical care.
So this whole...
Otherwise, they'd be worthless hypocrites, and that can't be true.
But you see, after almost 500 years of colonization, now that has to stop.
No, and I'm saying stop it now. They need to get off the train now. Stop the madness. Just as it came in all at once, they need to leave it all at once. And we will follow depending on how their experiment turns out.
Now, Charles, would you agree that Chicano studies across the United States, Spanish departments across the United States, are they breeding grounds for neo-Marxism and socialism and communism?
Well, they would try to be
Uh-huh.
on a good day. But you got to remember that a lot of the folks who teach that stuff, they're not as bright as they think they are.
Uh-huh. And let me ask you, should those departments be defunded for
Yes.
teaching anti-Americanism?
They should be defunded for not being academic departments.
Mm-hmm.
They should be defunded simply because they're worthless.
Now, you know, in Arizona in 2010, the state tried to outlaw the Mexican American studies based that they were teaching anti-Americanism.
That's not what I would defund them for.
Uh-huh.
Because anti-Americanism, I mean, it's as vague a thing as anything they themselves would teach.
Right.
I would defund them because they're not academic and they're not teaching anything real.
Well, according to them, they are. They have
Well,
PhDs.
you know, according to every criminal, he's innocent. Well, so what? I don't care if they've got PhDs. So did Dr. Rosenberg, Hitler's major theorist.
So they should be defunded.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If they're any good, they'll be able to get funding through their own excellence. They'll be able to start independent schools the way so many of these classical academies around the country have. You know, people teaching Plato and Aristotle, their sheer excellence.
But then they will argue that it's going against free speech, and that's it's protected by the Constitution.
That's not entirely true. There's a lot of speech that they themselves would forbid.
Such as.
Anything from denial of the Holocaust to the use of racial epithets.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Everybody has something they would forbid.
Mm-hmm.
You show me someone who says, I believe in complete free speech for everyone, I'll show you a liar.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, I'm not saying they'd be wrong as regards racial epithets and Holocaust denial.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is that there is speech that they themselves would have denied.
And how is it possible that in American universities, departments that do teach to be anti-American, anti-Spanish, anti-Hispanic be funded?
Well, because we have a very corrupt academic system.
Since, could you give us a day when it started being corrupt?
It was a very, very gradual process. And that's when gradual processes are always hard to figure out and pinpoint. But certainly, I mean, it's easy for Catholic universities.
Mm-hmm.
I could say the Land O'Lakes Conference in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say certainly in the 60s, maybe the late 50s sometime.
Mm-hmm. And now, to continue, your definition on a Chicano.
A mythical beast like a unicorn.
Aztlan.
Aslan,
Mm-hmm.
a mythical land like the land of Oz.
Spanglish.
Spanglish or Spanish?
Spanglish.
The language I grew up with on the streets of Los Angeles.
Now, in academia, they impose this identity on us. You know, we're no longer Mexicans, we're no longer Hispanics, we're Chicanos.
Well, no. There is no Chicania. It doesn't exist.
According to, well, then Aztlan would be...
What is Aztlan? The land of the Indians oppressed by the Aztecs? The people who got their hearts ripped out. The Tarascans, the Tlaxcalans, those guys.
Right, so...
Texcoco.
The southwestern United States, occupied territory.
Oh, you mean the northern rim of Christendom?
Right.
The Spanish called it.
Right.
Yeah.
That went all the way up to San Francisco, even beyond San Francisco. Right.
The northern rim of Christendom.
Right.
Yeah, that's not Aslan, that's the northern rim of Christendom.
Right.
Beyond which we're both pagan and heretical territories.
Right, and recently, they removed one of these marks that mark the Camino Real.
Yeah.
Santa Cruz, I believe. One of the
It's unconscious Yankee racism.
According to them, that removed this landmark, it's a symbol of racism, conquest.
No, it's a symbol
European.
It's a symbol of truth and civilization, and it was destroyed because they're idiots. And I mean that in the best, most charitable sense possible.
Now, why do you think we're trying to erase our European heritage and history from the public,
Because
the open spaces?
Because well, there are several reasons. I mean, there's no single one. It's like a perfect storm of drivel. You know, every sewer has many drains emptying into it, and so it is with this sewer. There's the Yankee anti-Hispanic element that's always there, the black legend sort of thing. There's as with our own American Revolution, as with the French, the Russian, every revolution has to justify itself, and that was true of the revolutions against the Spaniards. And these, of course, are continually justify themselves by educational propaganda. That feeds into it. There's a very particular anti-Christianity, anti-Catholicism element. You see, there are many different streams that feed into it, but these different drains go into the one sewer we call academia. And that academic sewer is very powerful in Santa Cruz. But it's only one of the several sewers that the dominant forces in our society empty into.
And Charles, just two more questions.
Sure.
You know, Spain has been the first European country, and I want to say the first that has endured this anti-Spanish sentiment for almost 400 years.
That's right.
Right, and it's hard for a Spaniard to be proud of their history because of this black legend that arose.
They become self-hating because they absorb this garbage from outside.
Right, but it seems now in the United States we're going through our own black legend.
Yeah.
That to be American now it's something to be shameful.
Yeah.
If I wear a MAGA hat, it's like, what's wrong with me if it says let's make America great again? So would you agree that America's going through its own black legend?
It is, and what makes America particularly vulnerable to this. All right. Now I'll be very blunt. This will shock you, but I do think that the interest of truth, being honest, is a good thing. America's ideological foundations have always been a bit shaky. And I could go on and on. I wrote a book about it, so you can find all about it in the Puritan's Empire. I'm sorry, was that a plug? But because of that, we have a lot of fishes that are easy to take advantage of. What is missing is the idea of the United States as a country. Not the shining city on the hill, not the last best hope of mankind, not the model for all others to follow, but the country that we're born in, the country we live in, the country that gave our fathers a really good opportunity, and the country for whom many of us have died for. That's enough, you know. We don't have to be the shining city on the hill. It's enough to be us. And that's what we've lost sight of, and maybe never did have sight of. The fact that we're not the shining city on the hill, and that probably no country is or ever could be, that's shaken our self-confidence tremendously. And it has never been replaced by anything else. It's certainly never been replaced by an admiration for the country as it is. I mean, these people going on with this drill, in most of the countries of the world, they wouldn't get beyond first base.
Right.
They'd be in jail. And yet here they can just yap away, and not only yap away, but dominate. They should be grateful that they're pulling this drill here and not elsewhere.
And you know what? We talk about Americans, white Americans being now ungrateful. You know, you had this actress, Annette, I believe, that she apologized for being white and born into privilege, and she was so ashamed.
You know what? I feel her pain.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. I feel her pain. I'll send her my address. She can send me her money. I'll take care of her privilege for her. Until she's willing to divest herself of all that cash and retire from acting and get a job, I don't know, at a Starbucks as a barista. Until she's willing to do that, I'm afraid I'm sure it isn't true, she'll come across as a hypocrite.
And you know, I believe that U.S. Hispanics are sometimes double ungrateful. That we're not grateful to be American, and we're not grateful to be Hispanic.
And as a result, what is lost is the opportunity that could be had of improving this country of ours through the growth of Spanish culture. You know,
because
again, most American Hispanics are cut off from
Right.
their culture. Even if they've still got the language,
Mhm.
they don't have the great writers, the great musicians, the great artists of Hispanic, and I mean by Hispanic I mean Spain and all Spanish America,
Right.
from Argentina, to Cuba.
Right.
They're cut off from all that.
Right. And, going back to the word mestizo,
No.
I have a problem with that word mestizo. People will say that I am mestizo. 50% European, 50% native.
Yeah.
Right? But it's actually, I'm half something. I'm not a whole number.
No.
I'm half this or I'm half that.
Well,
And I think that even the word Chicano is even worse because the Chicano is 50% non-American and 50% non-Hispanic. Therefore, that gives you a negative number.
Yeah, and well, as I say, it's a mythical beast.
Right.
Doesn't exist.
And a mestizo gives you a half number. So in order for me to be whole, I need to be Hispanic. Therefore, Hispanic is the whole number,
Well,
not mestizo or Chicano. Would you agree with that?
I
Or
would.
not?
I would. I mean, look, I'm French Canadian on my father's
Uh-huh.
side. Okay, Canadian French is my first language. We have a lot of Indian blood. We say métis.
Mhm.
That's the French word for mestizo.
Mhm.
Métis. You can't really divide it because the different elements
Mhm.
have made the whole.
Right.
You can speak, for instance, of Our Lady of Guadalupe
Mhm.
and Our Lady of Los Remedios.
Right.
They're both the Virgin.
Exactly.
They're
Right.
both the Virgin. And similarly, we have St. Catherine Tekakwitha
Mhm.
in New York and Canada.
Mhm.
Mohawk lady, but French speaking.
Right. Last question. If you had a young Hispanic, what would be your advice to them?
Learn your heritage. Learn the great wealth of Hispanidad, and learn to bring it and apply it into the Anglosphere. Because you've been born and raised at the apex of two of the four great cultures that make up the West.
Which are?
Well, Hispanidad, the Anglosphere, Lusophonía, and Francophonie. I'm sorry, I was just meditating on how wonderful the French are. But mind you, it's a lot more, shall we say, complex in Europe. And then you've got the Russian zone, but that's contiguous
Right.
to Vladivostok. In terms of the West beyond the seas,
Mhm.
it was primarily those four nations.
Mhm.
And together, they are the pillars upon which our world civilization rests.
Mhm.
Now, what united them originally was their faith.
Mhm.
As they've lost it, they kind of decayed. But nevertheless, the remnants are still there. And there's a big difference between remnants and nothing at all.
Mhm.
You can always hope when you've got coals burning amongst a pile of stuff that you can breathe the coals back to life.
Mhm.
If there's nothing there, there's nothing. And those coals are still there, still waiting to have the breath of life on them. But that's something that responsibility for that breath rests with each of us.
Well, Charles, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.